Becoming an owner-operator is highly sought after by a lot of drivers in our industry. The lure of the freedom, the bigger paychecks, and the chance to become your own boss. But what a lot of drivers don't realize is that just buying a truck does not automatically make you a successful owner-operator. In fact, the first 90 days is when we see most of the big mistakes happening. Drivers overspend, they chase the wrong freight, they misunderstand cash flow, and they learn very quickly that trucking as a business is different than trucking as a driver. Those first 90 days can either set you up for long-term success, or they can put you in a hole that becomes incredibly difficult to dig out of. So today we are going to break down what brand new owner operators need to focus on during those first 3 months in business. We're going to talk about some of the mistakes that we commonly see, including some of the mistakes that I made, and we're going to talk about some of the habits that separate successful owner operators from those who struggle. I'm Chris. This is my 7th year owning a trucking company and hosting the Haulin Assets podcast. When I first started, I thought I knew trucking. Turns out I had no idea how much I would learn. Welcome back to Haulin Assets 2.0, where I take you through the good and the bad, the ups and the downs of being an owner-operator.
Indeed, welcome everybody to episode 197 of the Haulin Assets podcast. As you just heard, 197, we are getting closer to 200. We'll have an announcement regarding that particular number at the end of the episode, so stay tuned for that. I am your host, Craig. Over there, he's Chris. How's it going, Chris?
It's going well. How are you doing, Craig?
You know, not bad. Your intro put me in mind of a story, Chris, but I'll get to that in just a second. I do want to remind people to go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com for full show notes, especially for those financials episodes that we do. And then also go to MotorCarrierHQ.com for the tools, tips, and people, and merch that you need to make the leap from employee driver to owner operator. I'm adapting my my regular cadence here. And then lastly, go to HaulinAssetsAcademy.com for the self-directed learning that you need. The self-education that Chris and his team have so lovingly put together and put out there so cheaply that I'm not making this up. I picked up the phone to text Chris when I saw the pricing and was like, are you sure? Anyway, so HaulinAssetsAcademy.com.
Yeah, it'll have that has a really good ROI.
I wish it didn't sound so salesy when I said, holy crap, you guys. This is like peanuts for the education you're getting. Anyway, all right, that's the end of my sales pitch. Chris, we're talking about the first 90 days as an owner-operator, and your intro put me in mind of when I struck out on my own, okay? And you were the one who kind of initiated this for me in a big way. I was working at a marketing company. I was making a lot of content. I was doing blog posts and podcasts and YouTube videos. And I was doing this on my own as well, on the side, but just passion project kind of stuff. And then I get this email from some guy named Chris, and he's like, hey, can you help me start a podcast? Yeah, sure, no problem. So you come on as a client of mine, and then I picked up one other client, and I went, wait a minute. Wait just 1 minute. I could do this on my own. I don't need to work for this company that I was employed under. So I quit my job, picked up a bunch of clients, started this business, and it lasted about 3-4 years, something like that. And then I discovered something very, very important, which is that knowing how to do something and knowing how to run a business around that thing are two totally different issues and skill sets. And that's what we're talking about today. And I bring that up simply to say that if any of the truckers out there who are thinking about making the leap, or if you have and you've gone, oh my gosh, this is so hard, you're not alone. It's not just trucking, okay? This is a universal thing. When somebody wants to go into business for themselves, you'll find that there's a steep learning curve, and you may be cut out for it, you might not. Chances are if you are, right? You kind of understand your personality that way. But Chris, am I right? This is a pretty universal thing.
It is, and it's such a, I love how you articulated that, because it is such a big leap of faith to step away from a more guaranteed income working for somebody else to into the unknown as an owner operator. And Haulin Assets is all about helping people make that transition. And this is going to be a really fun episode because it focuses on that. It focuses on that initial 90 days. It's the most important time in any new business. Those first 90 days are either going to set you up for success or they are going to be the beginning of your downfall.
Yep, there you go. And you know what? Again, I can tie that back to myself. Looking back on my experience as a self-employed person, I just found that I wasn't quite built for it in the way that I thought maybe I could have been. And then I look back on it and I was like, oh yeah, I was totally unprepared going into it and then understanding what I needed to do to set my little business up for success. So anyway, it's as people can see, you and I are still making the podcast, so I still have at least one client left, right? But no, I've jumped ship and gone back corporate. So you know, I have a 9-to-5 now, and for me, that ended up being probably the better choice. And gosh, if you're listening to this podcast, it's because you probably have that entrepreneurial spirit, that attitude of, hey, I can do this. And I do want to reassure people, like, hey, you can. You can. If you educate yourself and you use those first 90 days, you absolutely can do it. And so could I have done it? Yeah, probably. But here I am choosing a different path. And that's okay too for people listening.
And it's not the right move for everybody. You know, becoming an owner operator has its own unique set of challenges, and there's pros and cons and everything. And it's a really personal decision. It's different for everybody. But if it is something that you want to do, then you know, hopefully we can kind of help you along that journey, help you make that decision. And then if you do decide to do it, help you be successful at it. And that's really what this episode is all about, is to help avoid some of the mistakes, help you focus on the right things during those first 90 days to increase your chance of being successful.
Right. All right. So Chris, let's talk about the first kind of myth or misconception that we could address here. And you have already articulated it, which is, once I buy a truck, I'm going to start making money. And I would just amend that, if you want it to be a true statement, it's, once you buy a truck, you might start making money, right? You can start making money.
You can, and you will, like, what is making money? Because you will probably bring in revenue.
Right.
And this is one of the things that I really want to talk about misconception-wise, because this is, a lot of people don't think this through. They don't realize this. You see all the social media posts, when we've talked about this before, but I made $20,000 this month, my first month as an owner operator, or I made $30,000 this month. And okay, you brought in $30,000, but that's not how much money you took home that you can put towards your mortgage and everything else. You know, along with that higher revenue, way higher than you've probably seen in your life, also comes a lot of really big expenses. And that's kind of some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, and then there's other stuff that goes along with that where you think, okay, I'm self-employed now, I'm my own boss, I'm free to do things exactly how I want to do. It's not just the freedom of the open road, it's now, I don't have a boss. And that's not accurate. Again, we talked about that. I don't want to rehash our previous episodes. So if you haven't listened to the last 3 or 4 episodes, you can go back and hear some of this stuff as well. But Chris, you've been a business owner for a while, and then you transitioned to starting your own actual trucking company over the road. Tell me about what ownership reality is actually like. And we're going to keep things broad, I think, for now. We're going to get into more specifics, but what does it feel like to be an owner? Is it pure freedom? Is it sweet, sweet cash all day long? Tell me about it.
It's interesting kind of what people, like when you talk to owner operators, everybody, whether it's through social media or just talking to somebody face and face, everybody paints typically the brightest picture for their situation and talk about just the good things. They don't talk about the challenges. That's one of the things we've tried to be real with here. So, the high glamorous dollar amounts, the freedom, complete total freedom. There's a little bit of truth with these things, but there's also a lot of reality that is different than that. So with trucking and with any kind of business out there, but especially with trucking, you're going to have good days when everything feels awesome. You don't regret the decision. And then you're going to have bad days when you're like, why in the world did I do this? And that's the reality behind it. A couple of other things is your stress levels are probably going to be higher as an owner-operator than they ever were driving for somebody else. Because especially as an owner-operator, you're doing all the things you did as a driver, but then you also have the additional stress of the things that come along with owning a business and everything relying and depending on you. That's a lot of weight on your shoulders.
Well, that, and I would say the other stressor is constant decision making, right? You have to decide where to fill up. You have to decide who to hire as your factoring company. You have to decide which loads to take. You have to decide. A lot of the things that were decided for you as an employee are now your decision. And decision fatigue is a real thing. And it can be pretty brutal. Now, Chris, I do want to, again, amend something that we've said, because we don't want to paint some, gloom and doom picture here. A lot of people go the owner-operator route and are really successful with it. And why is that? Well, I would amend what you're saying here with this. Your stress levels are going to be higher than they ever were as an employee driver for a while. But if you do it right, again, the first 90 days, and then the first 6 months, and the first year, if you set yourself up for success and you really understand your business, your truck, your routes, your vendors, whoever, then you are eventually, the investment you're making in yourself will pay off in the stuff that you're actually talking about looking for. A little more money, a little more freedom. The stuff that you weren't able to get as an employee driver, but it will take time. It's this transition period that we're talking about today that is stressful. And I would say that is universal. Your first 90 days, you're going to be stressed out. Right?
Absolutely. Because on top of that, it's just everything's new. And so you don't have that experience behind you to help you kind of lean on when a challenge comes up. It's not a challenge you've had to solve before. As you solve those challenges, as you become better at fixing problems, those stress levels are going to go down. They're never going to go away,
right?
But they will go down.
So you've mentioned that, your first 90 days, and this is something that we want to hit here, your first 90 days is less about making money and more about learning your business. But we're going to talk about learning the business and what those first 90 days are all about. But as far as the money aspect of it, what is a realistic expectation? If somebody's starting an owner-operator business, can they expect to go heavily into debt and, lose a whole bunch of money those first 90 days or 6 months or what have you? What's the expectation money-wise here?
So I would say ideally you don't want to be losing a whole bunch of money. In the perfect world, you're going to go into it. You're going to be able to pay cash for kind of your startup costs and have a little bit of reserve to get you through that first year. Because that first year, if you're lucky, you're going to break even.
Right.
If you're lucky, you're going to break even. You might lose a little bit of money, but again, you're setting yourself up for long-term success. So. Keep that in mind. Don't set your expectations up super high. You're not going to get rich in that first year.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Chris, let's dive into systematically talking about these first 90 days. Let's start with the first 30 days. What is the key principle here? What's our organizing idea in the first 30 days of the business?
Survival mode. The first 30 days, you're just trying to survive. You're learning a lot. You're probably working really, really hard, and you're just trying to survive.
Okay, so what does that look like then? What are some of the activities? Now, when you say you're just trying to survive, and we're learning our business for those first 30 days, are you driving much?
Yeah, you're probably driving a ton. But let's kind of talk about some of the big kind of key things that you really need to be focusing on and learning in that first 30 days, especially. But really, this kind of all encompasses the first 90. But really in this first 30 days, here are a few things that you really, really need to focus on. And the first one is learning and understanding your freight markets. You could be doing short haul, you could be focusing on kind of more medium regional hauling, or you could be full blown over the road. Whatever one of those you are, you need to learn and understand your market. So that means the seasonality items, the different lanes that are available in that market, which ones pay better. And you can't just focus on freight leaving your home state or your home area. You also need to understand what that freight coming back looks like. And it's really just focusing in on learning that freight. That's the first thing.
And can I throw deadhead in there as well? We're going to talk about understanding your numbers. You talked about understanding your lanes and whatnot. It's one of those things would be, how far out can I go to pick up a load to haul across the road or over the road? What are my limits? We're in the Salt Lake City area. It's like, can I afford to go all the way up to Idaho Falls or Boise to pick up a load? Or is that going to be stretching my deadhead too much, right? Those little issues where you're keeping track of those numbers so that you learn that. And well, I guess we're probably going to get more into this stuff, but you're going to make some mistakes, right? You're going to go too far on deadhead to get a load, and you'll learn from that. And so that's what this first 90 days and really the first year, like you said, is for.
Unless you're really lucky, you're not going to make a few mistakes.
Fair enough.
You're going to make a lot of mistakes, which is fine. That's all part of the learning process. And that's part of the reason that those first 90 days especially are really difficult, because you're making those mistakes that for every 2 steps forward you take, you're going to take a step back. And as you learn, and that's what really the key to this is you're constantly learning. As you learn, you're going to get better and better, make fewer and fewer of those mistakes, and become more and more profitable.
Yeah. All right, Chris, one thing that I know we need to do in these first 90 days is networking. The dreaded, well, I was going to use a term for that, but the dreaded word networking, right? This is very few people's favorite thing to do. But if you are diligent and build your network with other people in the industry, and especially in your geographical area, it'll pay off in spades. Let's talk about networking. Where do you want to start with that?
First and foremost is that I cannot emphasize this enough. You have got to start building a network. You've got to start learning shippers and brokers. Getting to know more of them in your area is going to be better and make a huge difference in your business long term. In fact, Nate and I were talking about this just a few days ago, and Nate said, this is one of the lessons I wish I would have learned a little earlier on. He has found once you can get your foot in the door with a shipper, typically building relationships with them becomes easy. What's more difficult is brokers, and brokers are an important part of this business. It's very rare that a trucking company, especially a smaller owner operator, is able to get all of their loads or a vast majority of their loads just directly from shippers. You're usually got at least half of your loads coming from brokers.
Right.
But when you develop a good relationship with brokers, it makes everybody's life easier. The brokers learn to trust you. You learn to trust the broker. You know what lanes they have loads in, when they typically have those loads, and it makes it easier to time things so that you're running more efficiently. You're not having to waste a ton of your time on load boards, getting worse paying freight. You're getting more consistent, better freight from not just shippers, but also from brokers. And you do that, it makes your life easier, it makes their life easier. You've got to focus a good chunk of your time on developing those relationships.
Okay, so this could be an entire episode on how to develop those relationships, but if I may offer a quick idea for folks. You've just started your brand new authority. You're going over the road. You're excited about it. Tell people, and don't expect them to necessarily celebrate in the same way you are, but just let people who are important know. Now, the broker relationships, that would be one thing where you want to develop those relationships quickly and thoroughly. But with direct shippers, like you, the experience you had, Chris, is that direct shipper relationships take time and a whole lot of effort to materialize, right? And so in that first year, throw some milestones out there. Be ready with the people who you get in contact with. You know, maybe it's a direct shipper that you would like to have a relationship with one day. Then you let them know, hey, I just started this company. I'm really excited. If at any point I can help, let me know. And then 3 months down the road, hey, just dropping a line. Completed my first 90 days. I'm really excited. Things are going great. I'm excited to work with you at some point. 6 months, you do the same thing. A year in, you say, hey, it's been going great for a year. I feel ready to take on more direct relationships like yours, you know, whatever the wording is that you want to use. But you're not expecting anything from them. You're just letting your whole network know. This is like what LinkedIn is all about, right? It's so it can feel annoying, but also very, very effective. You're letting your network know, hey, I've reached my 90-day mark. I reached my 1-year mark. I'm really excited to work with you now. Let's get together and chat about how I can help your business, right? So
anytime you have an excuse to reach out to a shipper or broker, you should take it. You shouldn't be reaching out to them just at times when you need something.
Right.
Like if they can see that you've truly got some kind of interest in them, they will typically reciprocate with some interest in you. And that's when those relationships and really friendships, you know, business friendships start developing. And that's when you kind of start helping each other out and working together on things.
Yeah. Okay. So let's see. Chris, anything else you want to talk before we get into mistakes from your first 90 days?
So I kind of want to just point out that, you know, we talked about building these relationships, understanding the freight market, understanding lanes. As you get your first 30 days and 60 days and 90 days under your belt, you're going to start repeating these lanes. And you need to constantly be analyzing and figuring out which lanes are the best for you and put them on repeat. Create some redundancy, build some routines. The more you run the same lanes, the easier it becomes to run into the same brokers, and that repetition builds those relationships. The more you can run multiple loads for brokers or shippers, that helps build that relationship of trust. And that's ultimately what's going to get you paid the most and what's going to make your life easier and more efficient.
Okay. All right. Good. Chris, let's get into, maybe any other specifics of things, tactical things that people can do. We talked about numbers. Which numbers would you say are the most important to track in those first 30 days?
As an owner-operator, and really as a fleet owner as well, your first two biggest expenses are going to be pay to drivers. So if you're owner-operator, what you're paying yourself, or drivers if you're hiring people. And then the next one's fuel. And right now, fuel's higher than drivers just because fuel's crazy right now. So one of the biggest things I would focus on is on your fuel. What price you're paying for it, get a good fuel card, and then also being efficient, you know, trying to be gentle on the accelerator, doing everything that you can to be fuel efficient. You know, it's kind of crazy. If most lanes have some extra time built into them. If you are an owner operator, you know, if you get to the delivery location 4 hours early, unless it's a place that will let you deliver early, which most of the time it's not, there's not a whole ton of advantage to that, other than you're building yourself a little bit of fudge factor in there, which is good. But it's also good to drive a little bit slower. You know, the difference between driving 65 miles an hour and 75 miles an hour in a semi truck is huge when it comes to how much you spend on fuel.
Yeah. Okay, good. So we need to keep track of our fuel. I already mentioned deadhead, understanding your deadhead so you can be, again, as efficient as possible. And again, you're going to make plenty of mistakes. The point right now in the first 30 days is to do the best you can and learn, right? And then the other thing would be, this is where you start building your routines. If you've ever played a sport or a musical instrument or anything like that, then you understand the value of not learning the wrong way at the beginning. And so what I would say when it comes to your routines, you mentioned you could get to your delivery location 4 hours early. What's your routine once you get to a delivery location? If you're early, what's the next thing you do? And then what's the next thing you do after that? What do you do when you wake up in the morning? What do you do before you shut down the truck for the night and you're clocking out, right? What is your routine? And you're not going to get it perfect in the first 30 days, but you should have one and start developing that. It's going to be a lot easier to adjust that later on in your ownership journey than it is to create routines down the road once you've already established the lazy versions, right? Okay. So Chris, let's talk about some mistakes that you might have made really early on. How did they go?
The fun stuff. I've made a lot of mistakes. There's kind of 4 right now I really want to focus in on and highlight. The first one is there's a myth in the industry that single owner operators cannot get direct loads from shippers. You'll hear people say that all the time. And it's so I think this comes from, there's a bit of truth to it, because it's harder for owner operators to find shippers that will work directly with just a single truck. Sometimes they want a fleet with 5 trucks or 10 trucks to kind of help handle the capacity. But there are a lot of shippers out there who will take smaller owner operators. And typically those shippers are ones that are either in a market where there's more freight than there are trucks. They will typically start to bend. Or if they're having a hard time covering a lane, they have a hard time finding fleets that want to do a lane that might be a little bit more difficult, which for a big size fleet might not be worth it for them, but for you as an owner operator might. So it's like everything else in life. It's a sales process. You've got to knock enough doors, and you knock a certain number of doors, and you're going to get in and you're going to find some business. But you're going to probably get rejected 5 or 10 times before you find somebody that's a good match.
Okay. Yeah. What's next? What other mistakes did you make?
Another one that's a really big one that I wish I would have learned a lot earlier is not regularly evaluating the profitability on lanes, because that changes. What might be a good lane today might not be a good lane 6 months from now. And if you're not constantly, it's very rare that you're just driving one lane back and forth all the time. A lot of the times you've got 3 or 4 lanes that are kind of your bread and butter. You should at least, I do it on a monthly basis, at least quarterly, you should be looking at each lane, how much you are getting rate per mile on that lane, and compare it with your other lanes. And that will help you focus on, you may find that you've got 3 great lanes and a bad one. And so that may mean instead of running that bad one, if those other 3 aren't available, maybe you start looking elsewhere at some lanes you haven't run in a while. But if you're constantly looking at them, you need to see what your rate per mile is, what your revenue per day is on those lanes. And if there's something in one of those lanes that maybe you get stuck at the end of one of them for too long on a regular basis, and that may make it a bad lane, you've got to constantly be analyzing that.
Okay, all right. And then you've mentioned before that you not using a TMS early enough. What's that?
Yeah, so your transportation management system. If you're an owner operator, you probably don't need a TMS, but you should still have a process or a system that you can use to record data on the lanes that you run so that you can do this analysis. If you don't have a good TMS, you're going to get disorganized, and you're not going to have a really good way to do that lane analyzing.
So what you're saying is that if you're managing 10 trucks, 100 trucks, you're going to need some nice software to help you manage all that. If you're running just your own truck, am I correct in assuming that in these first 30 days, it could be as simple as keep some spreadsheets for fuel expenses, for driver pay, for lane profitability, those sorts of things. Any number you can, write it down as you go.
I would even say, just for the purpose of kind of tracking the lanes that you're running, I don't even think you need to put that much detail in it. If you're tracking where the load picked up, where it dropped off, how many miles of deadhead were in it, how many actual loaded miles there were, what your rate was on it, so that then you can calculate your loaded rate per mile, your total rate per mile, and then how much revenue per day. So when that when that load started, when it delivered, so that you can calculate the revenue per day. I think the two most important metrics when measuring a lane are the revenue per day. That includes, if you get stuck at the end of it, a day where you're sitting, that needs to include that day too. Revenue per day and your total rate per mile. Those are the two biggest tools for analyzing a lane.
Right. All right, Chris, other lessons from the road.
One more quick one, not having a system, and I still just use a spreadsheet for this to track maintenance on trucks and trailers, and really kind of focusing in on when tires are getting replaced, when the brakes are getting replaced, those regular maintenance items, so that I can tell, is there a truck or a trailer that we're wearing out the brakes too quickly, or the tires are wearing out too quickly. I wish I would have started doing that way sooner than I did.
Yeah. Okay. And so the point of all this is to help you identify, I mean, obviously your business as a whole, but as you're talking about lane profitability, we've talked in the past about lanes that seem really great until you actually do them. So Florida would be your notorious example of, wow, that's a really good rate per mile we're getting going into Florida. And then coming out of Florida is really tough, or it just sometimes there are some routes where it's like, yeah, and you're going to be climbing several mountain ranges. And it's like your fuel costs are going to go through the roof on this particular route, or, whatever. There could be any number of things, right?
Yeah. And you take, for example, 3 or 4 years ago, we're doing less than a quarter of the loads to Florida today than we were doing 3 or 4 years ago. And it's for that very reason. It's one of those things, the lane analysis really helped me realize this, that on average, we were spending too much time, sitting because we couldn't find a load coming out of Florida, and we got a load, the rate was too low. So we found that we were just spending too much time in Florida. And then we also found that our typical route that we were doing, going kind of up the East Coast and then over, added too many days onto our overall route, that truck was out. And they were bad miles. Those extra days were just crappy rate days. So we found that we could take an even worse rate leaving Florida, going more directly to the Midwest, and be better off than trying to get a somewhat better rate going up the East Coast and then back to Utah. So it's that constant evaluation of lanes and understanding your lanes makes a big difference on your profitability.
Yeah. And now something that we've talked about a lot, or I should say we've talked about it plenty, if sporadically, and that's safety culture. Those first 30 days, this would go along with what I was saying about build a routine, have a daily routine. Your safety culture, even if you're on your own, right? And we're not talking about a big company with lots of employees and drivers and all that, but safety culture on your own is still a thing, right?
It is, yeah. And even as an owner operator, you still have to be checking those boxes. You still have to be doing those things right. Your insurance companies, when you get your insurance renewals, they key in on those things, and they have a big impact on what you get charged.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Other lessons you learned the hard way, Chris?
There were more, but I think that's probably all we should cover at this point.
There's plenty.
There's always plenty.
There's always plenty of mistakes. Don't get me started on all the mistakes Chris has made.
I do want to say that the goal with this is not perfection. You're not going to be perfect. You're going to make mistakes. The goal is to constantly improve and constantly get better, learn from your mistakes, and that's going to help you make smarter decisions moving forward and going to make your business operate better and be more profitable.
Okay, excellent. Now, let's move on. These first 30 days, you're keeping track of everything that you can. You're building good systems and good routines. And now your first 30 days are done. You've been running hard and you've been tracking what you can track without necessarily, like those first 30 days, you're not suddenly going to become an expert on all this stuff, but The next 30 days is when you can start using the numbers you've been gathering to educate yourself. Am I right?
Absolutely. And kind of the message I want to convey with this is, if you want to be successful long term, you have to learn your numbers. Just about anybody can be successful and make money in the trucking industry when the freight market is really good. But on the inverse of that, when the freight market is really bad, almost nobody will stay in business if you don't know your numbers. Knowing your numbers is so critical, especially in a challenging market, that if you don't do that well, I can almost guarantee you're not going to survive.
Okay. So you've mentioned you don't necessarily need a big fancy TMS. Some spreadsheets will do, but what are you using them to track?
So the one thing that I would say that you absolutely have to have, I don't care if you're a small owner operator, a small fleet, or a big fleet, you've got to have a good accounting system that you can use to track your revenue accurately, that you can use to track your expenses accurately. If you can't do that, you're just about guaranteed not to succeed long term.
And if somebody's looking for a way to do that, you don't have to do it on your own. This is one of those trails that's been thoroughly blazed, right? Go get one of the big softwares out there.
Yeah, don't do it on your own. QuickBooks, or you can use a company like Tracking Assets that will kind of manage that piece for you, and they use QuickBooks. Just as long as you've got a good accounting system. There's some other ones out there that are less expensive than QuickBooks, like Wave. Just find a good accounting system that you can record everything in, and it's tracking. You can get a good profit and loss statement out of it. And
with that accounting system, this isn't replacing what we've talked about before, right? Tracking fuel costs and miles and routes and all that. This is a separate thing. Your accounting system.
Yeah, just your accounting, tracking those numbers.
Okay, so if somebody said, this again would probably be an episode on its own, so I don't want to dive too deep on what people are tracking in their accounting software. Are there presets and defaults that people can use for a trucking company in these softwares? Does it help you kind of set those things up?
Yeah, and this is another one of the things that Tracking Assets will help you with, is your chart of accounts, which basically are the different expense types and categories, revenue categories, and everything that you need to kind of set things up cleanly, so it's easy to understand, it's easy to track things. That setting up that chart of accounts is critical, and Tracking Assets can help that.
Okay, all right. So you mentioned on the other side of things, the numbers that are coming through your business. You mentioned fuel costs, you mentioned maintenance costs. What other expenses do you want to track?
I don't really want to get into that. All I will say is you need to track every single expense in your business. And if you're using an accounting system correctly, it's going to do that for you.
Okay.
You can get everything. Typically, if you're using the right bank account or banking system, it'll all import into your accounting system, make things relatively easy, so you're not spending a whole lot of time on it, but you have got to do that.
Okay, few minutes a day, track all your expenses, categorize them correctly, and thank yourself later. All right, Chris, are we ready to move on to days 60 through 90?
Let me talk about some of the common mistakes that I'm seeing with
Sure.
With learning your numbers. First and foremost, and this is by far the biggest one, I see this happen way too often, and in reality, this is one of the big reasons I decided to start Haulin Assets and kind of try to do this educational series. Is I see too many people, they start seeing those big revenue numbers coming in, they don't track things, so they don't understand their expenses going out, and they get big eyes and focused on the big money coming in, and they don't think about the expenses, and then they go out and buy their dream pickup truck, or they go get a bigger house, or they rent a bigger house, or do something like that. And the problem with that is if you start to overspend, whether it's on the business side and especially on the personal side, that overspending on the personal side all of a sudden starts driving some of the decisions that you have to make on the business side, which is never a good scenario to be in.
Right. Suddenly you've got the $1,000 truck payment, and that's driving your decisions
And
on.
it's got to come from somewhere,
Right.
and it's probably going to come out of the business and put the business at risk.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, any other mistakes you want to hit?
So ignoring bookkeeping, we kind of already talked a little bit about that. Not saving for taxes. Your first year, you're probably not going to make money, so it's not as big of a deal your first year typically. But the second and third years, when people actually do start making money, you're not saving enough, setting enough aside for taxes, and that can become a big problem.
Well, that would be one of those routines, right? You spend that first year, if you spend your first year saying to yourself, I don't have to worry about taxes because I'm not going to make any money, then you're telling your future self that this wasn't that important. So even if you're not spending a lot on taxes in that first year, still pay close attention to it. Keep track of those numbers, right?
Yep.
And then the other one, repairs, right? These things are going to happen, especially you've mentioned, Chris, if you're starting as an owner operator, with probably some exceptions, go buy a used truck, right? Don't get the shiniest new Peterbilt out there. Get something reasonable, and that something reasonable, much like your fixer-upper house or the beater car that you're still driving because you're not buying that big pickup truck yet, it's going to have some issues. Make sure that if you have a good month, you're not spending it on the pickup, you're putting something away for repairs and maintenance, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, all right. Good. How do you want to wrap up the first 60 days?
Just the revenue makes you feel successful, but your net income or your profit, that's what actually makes you successful. The top line revenue number is important, but the bottom line profitability number, that's what's critical. That's what you've got to understand. That's what you've got to focus on.
Okay, excellent. So let's go to days 61 to 90. This is your third month as an owner-operator. Congratulations, you've survived. And now I think it's time to start transitioning from the survival mode that you talked about into a little more routinely focused business management style stuff, right? Yeah. You're putting some of the education you've put yourself through in the first 60 days into practice to set yourself even more up for success later on, right?
Yep. Now you're building systems, creating processes that are going to help you be long-term successful.
Okay, so what kind of processes?
There's a couple different things that I think are important, especially, so this first one is especially if you're going to operate a fleet, tracking safety violations, addressing them with drivers, just making sure that you're staying on top of those. The next one, and I talked a little bit about this, is a good way to track maintenance records. This is, like I said earlier, this is like one of my regrets, one of my biggest mistakes that I wish I would have cued into a little bit sooner. So a system that tracks when you replaced each tire on the truck, when you replaced each brake. So you track that, know that, it helps you make better decisions on which tires last me the longest. Do these cheap ones, are they really the most cost effective, or am I better off buying the more expensive tire because it's going to last me longer? If you're tracking all that stuff, tires, brakes, airbags, DEF system, water separators, I think those are some of the most important things to track every time you replace it. Okay,
very good. All right. What else do you want to do during this time to set yourself up for success? What are this third month of your first 90 days? What else is it for?
I think that you also need to start focusing on managing your cash flow, really understanding the difference between cash flow and profitability, and make sure you're consistently bringing in enough cash to cover all those expenses, because cash flow and profitability are different.
You have 30 seconds, Chris. I'm timing you. What the heck is cash flow, and why is it not profitability? So
cash flow is the amount of money that you've got coming in, and profitability is the amount of money that's kind of left over. So they sound like they're the same, but they can be very different. One of the biggest things that we talk about as a difference is when you make a truck payment, part of that truck payment affects your cash flow, but doesn't affect your profitability. And you need to understand that.
Okay, so if someone wants to, understand profitability and cash flow, and I'm being 1,000% serious about this, Chris, hop on YouTube or whatever and just look for some economist lecture, or some college professor giving a class on business management 101 or econ 101, and where they define these terms, and they'll do it better than we can, and you'll thank yourself later for understanding this stuff.
Do you know who else also, if you want to go into a deeper dive, helps you with this?
Don't do it. Don't do it, Chris. Don't do it.
ChatGPT.
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to say Dave Ramsey.
not so much on the business side. Like ChatGPT, if you just say, "Hey, teach me about cash flow," you'll get some really good, not super in-depth, advanced stuff that will help you learn what cash flow is, and then ask ChatGPT, "Okay, what's the difference between cash flow and profitability?" ChatGPT, actually, I've started to use it a ton for it teaching me things like that.
Okay, yeah, very good. And what's nice about it is if it spits out an answer at me for something like that I don't quite understand, then I can go back to it and say, all right, I need you to pretend I'm the world's biggest idiot. Slow down. What's the most basic thing that I need to understand? It's really good at that. So,
it is.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say the last thing that I kind of really want to talk about in this piece is you've got to create a routine where you're, at least on a monthly basis, evaluating your lanes and evaluating your profit and loss. Look at that, look at those numbers. Once you've got a good profit and loss figured out, then you can start to dive even deeper and figuring out what your cost per mile is, both your variable cost per mile, your fixed cost per mile, your total cost per mile, and what your revenue per mile is. Once you've got a good clean P&L, you can get those numbers, and that's when you can really start doing that detailed look at your profit and loss statement, that detailed look at the profitability of each lane.
Okay, all right. So now we're going through the first 90 days, and a big part of this, what's the word, Chris? It's not motivation. It's dedication. No, that's not the right word. What's the word I'm looking for? Discipline. Your first 90 days, you are disciplining yourself. Right? Is this accurate? Is this fair?
Absolutely. There's a big difference between motivation and discipline. Discipline keeps you on the right path, right? It helps you. You take, for example, you may have a runner that's super motivated, but if they're running off course, they're running in the wrong direction, they're going to lose. But if they're on course, they're focused on the right things, a motivated person with discipline is going to get to the right spot. So, motivation that's blind is not important. More critical is discipline and focusing on the right things. It's sometimes hard to be patient. You want that get rich quick, that success overnight. That's not going to happen in most cases. It takes discipline.
And we've talked already in this episode about reducing your stress eventually as a business owner. And that's essentially how you're going to do it, right? The more disciplined you are, the more organized you are with your numbers and your reports and all of those things, the less stressful this becomes over time.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, Chris, we've talked about a few of the mistakes that you've made and some of the mistakes that you've seen a lot of new owner-operators make. I'm sure there are others. Do you want to quick fire a few more?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so give me a few rapid fires.
Taking cheap freight. That's probably one of the biggest ones. And usually new owner-operators do this because they don't understand their numbers. If you understand your numbers, you're probably not going to take cheap freight. The next one that's really common is ignoring maintenance. Little problems today become big problems tomorrow and more expensive problems. So as tempting as it can be to ignore maintenance, just don't do it.
Okay, all right. And then let's see, savings. You're going to talk about savings, right? You got to save.
You got to operate with an emergency fund. Make sure you've got a little bit of money set aside so that when something breaks down or something happens, you've got to tow the truck. You've got somewhere you can dip into to get the money to do that. Okay.
And then I assume you've talked about managing or just understanding. You're maybe not even managing as hard right now, but understand your expenses, track your expenses, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't, then you can't fix what needs fixing down the road.
You've got to understand that. Another common mistake that I see is owner operators believing everything they see on social media, following some of those influencers too closely, believing what they say. Don't do that.
Says the influencer.
I'm not. Yeah. I hope people can see that we're pretty transparent here.
Well, that's true. And
most aren't.
I used to say I could be a really good gaming influencer if I just looked better on Discord in a tank top, but I don't. So yeah, we're not influencers. All right, and then there's the I want to grow a fleet mistake, right? Would you say this growing too fast and like getting a little ahead of your skis, was that a mistake you feel like you made?
Absolutely. Yeah, we kind of grew too fast at the wrong time. So both of the, not just too fast, but too fast at the wrong time, and that made an incredibly difficult couple of years. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this in a minute, expand on a little bit, but growing too fast is definitely, if you get that 90 days, things felt really smooth and you're like, okay, I'm going to add a truck. Think long and hard before you start trying to grow your fleet, and don't do it too aggressively.
Okay.
Take the conservative route.
So, Chris, does that wrap up our 90 days discussion? I mean, there's a few other points we want to hit, but are you feeling good about the wisdom you've dispensed over the first 90 days?
Yeah, the only other thing that just to kind of wrap this up is say that most failures don't happen overnight. They happen because a lot of little mistakes compound over time. And especially when you make a mistake and you don't learn from it. So, just learn from your mistakes. Don't repeat them. Don't let those mistakes compound, and you'll be okay.
Okay. All right. So, Chris, if somebody is disciplined and they're on the right track, they're keeping things going, those first 90 days, you could do everything right that we've talked about in this episode and plenty of other things besides. You do it all right, and like you said a couple of times now, you're not going to make a bunch of money in your first year, almost certainly, right? You may even lose money. So if that's the case, how do you know if you're a new owner operator, you've gotten to the end of your first 90 days, how do you know I've been successful with these first 3 months?
You're getting a little bit better every day, and you're really learning your business. That's really kind of what it boils down to. You're learning and you're getting better. And that comes with also creating consistency. You're creating systems and processes that allow you to do things on repeat, using the same brokers, running the same lanes that you've found that are profitable, understanding your numbers so you know which lanes are profitable. If you're starting to do that, you're getting a big step ahead. And then, kind of lastly, you're avoiding those big financial mistakes. And if you're doing that and you've done that your first 90 days, chances are things are just going to keep getting better and better, and you're gonna be successful.
Okay, all right. So good. Does this wrap up our lesson, Chris? What other points do you want to hit before we go?
There's one other thing, maybe a couple other things that I really want to kind of emphasize. One, along with this is during those first 90 days, stability is way more important than growth. And once you 90 days and 6 months, and a year, that's kind of when you start to see people that have aspirations to turn into a fleet, start to kind of get that itch if they've been successful. But what a lot of people don't really think about, and this will help you avoid a ton of pain later on down the road, is you may be doing well or okay as a 1 or 2 truck fleet. You've got some little problems, but you can manage them. But if you've got little problems or little inefficiencies in your business as a 1 or 2 truck fleet, and you start to grow, those little problems and those little inefficiencies are going to grow with your fleet, and they become bigger and bigger and harder to manage, and can ultimately sink you. So before you grow, you've got to make sure all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, everything's operating efficiently, and those little problems are solved, and you've figured them out. Once you've got that happening, then start thinking about growth.
Very good. Well, Chris, I am formally throwing this hat into the ring. This has to be an episode in the future. You remember the one, many mickles make a muckle? Is that what, did I get it?
You got it. You got it. Good job.
I want an episode in the future called The Trouble with Tribbles. Do you remember this episode of Star Trek?
No, I don't.
This is like the original Star Trek. I swear it was like the 4th episode. It was very early on, I think. And it's about these like tiny little aliens that multiply so quickly they start taking over the Enterprise and just taking up too much space, and it's the trouble with tribbles. Anyway, so you talking about these little inefficiencies that grow over time. I would love to dive into what exactly some of those things are. The tiny little inefficiencies, or you get lazy about tracking this or that number or what have you. So anyway, I'm throwing that in for the future.
I think that would make a great episode.
Okay, all right. And so if somebody is thinking about growing into a small or even a large fleet, you're talking about managing those inefficiencies and mistakes early on. And you'll know, if I'm understanding right, you'll know when it's time to start expanding if your business is running smoothly on a consistent basis. And I would go so far as to say, if you've never been through a bad freight market, caution ahead. If your business has never been tested during a bad freight market, watch out. It might be time to expand, but be very careful, and you better be sure that your foundation is rock solid, because that bad freight market is coming. And if that happens, as Chris knows well, if you buy your 10th truck and suddenly there's no more good freight to be had, you're screwed.
Yep.
So would that be fair? I don't want to tell people absolutely don't expand if you've never been through a bad freight market, but that would be a good indicator, right?
I think that's a really good way to put it. Like if you've never been through a bad freight market, that's where you definitely should be incredibly conservative about how you grow.
Yep. Okay, perfect. All right, Chris, before we wrap up, what else do you want to say about all this?
Just 2 things real quick. Be patient, whether you want to be an owner-operator or own a small fleet. In this period, you've got to learn patience. Don't be conservative. Don't try to run too fast, and be patient with yourself. Give yourself some grace when you're making mistakes.
Okay.
And then always think long-term. Again, whether you're an owner-operator or want to be a fleet, think long-term, make long-term decisions. That's ultimately going to build you the strongest, most profitable business.
Okay. Don't try to get rich right away.
Yep.
Try to build a good business that'll make you rich later.
There you go.
Or at least comfortable, right, Chris? All right. Now, that should wrap up, I think, our first 90 days discussion. But Chris, I promised before we go, we want to talk about a giveaway that you want to do for the 200th episode. So before we do that, of course, HaulinAssetsLLC.com, MotorCarrierHQ.com, and HaulinAssetsAcademy.com. Make sure everybody, you go check those things out. And while you're surfing the web looking for these things, pop over into your favorite social media app or your podcast player and give us 5 stars and some good comments, and that would be much appreciated. And it really does go a long way. All right, Chris, what's going on with the 200th?
The 200th episode's approaching really quickly. It's not going to be here very long down the road. So as part of the 200th episode celebration, we're going to do a really cool giveaway, more information to follow. So keep your eye on our social media. Keep your eye, keep listening to the episodes that come. We'll put out more details as we get closer. This 200th episode milestone is incredible for me. I mean, at this point, we've been doing this for over 7 years. We couldn't have done it without all the listeners that we've got. So whether you've been listening since episode number 1 or you're new to the podcast, thank you for being a part of it. And we kind of want to, share that and with the giveaway and make this the 200th episode something special.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. More to come.
More to come.
Yeah, more to come. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Like Chris said, I'll echo that. Thank you very much. You might be a long time or a brand new listener. Either way, glad to have you here. If you enjoy the episodes, then go ahead and jump on Facebook and let us know by heaping lots of abuse on Chris the way that I do. That would be much appreciated. Otherwise, I guess, Chris, I'll see you in a couple weeks.
See you then. One last thing I kind of want to say. So if you are an owner-operator, brand new in your first 90 days, focus on learning. Focus on your numbers, focus on consistency. The money will come once you've built that solid foundation. The drivers who succeed long term are not the ones that know everything. They're usually the ones that get themselves in trouble. The successful ones are the ones that are constantly learning and constantly improving.
Hear, hear. All right, see you, Chris.
See ya.